Yeah, so we did DC, now it's on to Marvel. My top five Marvel comics. This like DC was kind of fairly tricky. I mean, I had a few fairly good storylines in my list that most people would probably rank higher, and I had some good stuff in there, like both versions of Secret Wars from both 1984 and 2015, Daredevil's Born Again, and the Infinity Gauntlet. All of them, they are good comics. And once again, I want to state this is only my personal top five. They don't have to be your favourite. They're just the ones that I find I enjoy best, and they're fairly more recent ones. But once again, here we are. My top five. Top five best Marvel comics for me, at least. My number five, Civil War 2. With the movie of Captain America Civil War coming out in 2016, it was kind of decided that they would do to kind of keep in line with this, they would do a follow-up comic to the 2011 storyline of Civil War. But yeah, while the previous one had Captain America and Iron Man fighting over the Registration Act, this one features Iron Man and Carol Danvers, i.e. Captain Marvel, fighting over an Inhuman who can supposedly predict the future. Which, once again, you can see both sides, even if you are kind of towards one side, to which while I could see both sides of this one, while I admit he did some things that probably weren't the best, I was ultimately on Iron Man's side in this case, that, yeah, since he was arguing that the punishment technically can't come before the crime, which I kind of felt more... I can understand Carol Danvers' viewpoint, though, and yeah, I did find it to be quite an interesting one, and very fast-paced action, which is why it makes it to my number five. I admit it's probably not as good as the original, but yeah, we'll get to that. My number four spot actually goes to a single issue. Pretty much the only single issue that I own, and kind of quite a rare one it was. Deadpool, The Never-Ending Struggle. Honestly, I feel the best way to sum it up is kind of what the author of this comic provided kind of a small note at the back, kind of summing things up about how he was writing this story, and also kind of giving a number for people to call if they really need help with it. And yeah, I do feel it's a story that sounds like in your head that it shouldn't work, but then you read it and they manage to pull it off very well. The story essentially being Deadpool, the moat with a mouth, the guy who's always got a wisecrack, who's always kind of making jokes and killing people, trying to save someone who is about to kill themselves, a suicide victim. And yeah, it sounds like in your head it shouldn't work, but then you read it and yeah, I think the author at the back said it best, that he at first thought, no, I can't do that, and then eventually he thought, hang on, I may have shortchanged him. He may actually be able to do this, and they do it very well. Yeah, the artwork is stunning. Yeah, the story is it's typically Deadpool. It's typical Deadpool, but then they managed to work the way around the story very well, and I do think it's one that, yeah, they might have shortchanged on it at first, but they did it very well in this case, and it does provide, as I said at the back, it does provide kind of a number for support if people need help, which is, again, I think what this comic did very well. Anyway, my number three goes to a friend of Deadpool's, SpiderMan. Typically Spider-Man Blue. I did have the Deadpool and Spider-Man story, Isn't It Bromantic, on my list, but that one eventually got pushed down, and yeah, my number three spot goes to Spider-Man Blue, which, once again, it kind of rewrites parts of Spider-Man's history, but then it does it in a kind of very heartfelt way. The basic setup of it being that Peter Parker, sitting in an attic, attempting to tell Gwen how he feels through old tape recorders, even though she's been dead for years. And it is kind of a very heartfelt story, kind of dealing with long-term grief, and even the ending, I won't spoil it, but it's surprisingly perfect, and yeah, I think he does very well here. I mean, the story is kind of classically Spider-Man. You do get to see him kind of flying around, fighting some of his kind of most iconic bad guys like Kraven, Green Goblin, and the Vulture, and even I think Electro at one point. Oh, or if not Electro, kind of Rhino and the Lizard. So you do get to see him fighting bad guys and doing all the typical Spider-Man stuff. But then there's also kind of a twinge of kind of melancholy to it, which I do think works very well in Spider-Man's settings, especially at this point in his life. My number 2 spot goes to Planet Hulk. It was a toss-up. I did also have World War Hulk here, and it was kind of in there, but eventually it got pushed down, and I feel ultimately Planet Hulk has to take effect. I mean, while World War Hulk does have kind of a few more of the characters that we all kind of know and love, Planet Hulk I feel is the better story. I mainly bought this I think back in 2016. Well, while Thor Ragnarok wouldn't be released until the next year, I've heard that they were going to use elements of Planet Hulk for Thor Ragnarok. So, and when the movie actually came out, I was surprised how much they did actually keep in there. But yeah, essentially the Hulk gets banished into space and kind of ends up on the planet Sakaar, and well, yeah, all kind of wackiness ensues with him even having to fight in an arena for a guy called the Red King. Or yeah, I think that's what his name is. But yeah, and eventually kind of leading a revolt against the Red King in order to kind of take back the planet of Sakaar. And I do feel it is one of those ones that if you're an MCU fan or haven't, if you're a fan of the MCU but haven't necessarily got into that much into Marvel Comics yet, it's a good one to jump into. You appreciate the stuff that does kind of show up in the MCU, but then it's also a good comic on its own. And it's kind of typically Hulk. I mean, while Hulk in the MCU is kind of a little bit more quiet than the other one in the comics is, it's a good story to read through. I advise it for anyone who can. But my number 1, if you haven't ticked already, my number 1 was Civil War. Where to really begin with this? As I said, I only started recollecting comics and graphic novels from Marvel and DC and other publishers back in 2016, and the only reason I really did that was because the movies and TV shows were starting to, while they still included the characters that we knew and loved, they were also starting to develop more complex storylines, and ones that were more closely linked for the comics. Which is why the first one I got was Civil War. It was said that while it would be a very loose adaptation, they would be basing it off the 2011 Civil War comic. So I knew I had to buy it in order to get up to date with what was going on. So I bought it, and it's still, I think, my favourite Marvel comic. I mean, yeah. Captain America and Iron Man fighting against each other over the superhero registration acts, and while I do think I do prefer the ending of the comic a little more than the ending of what the movie gave us, they're still good in their own rights, and I still feel it is, for me, the best Marvel comic I've read. I mean, I have picked up a load more since then, but yeah, for me, it was the first one I got, and I still think it's the best. Nothing really more to say on that. Until then, see you.